I'm from El Paso, and grew up there, and graduated from college, started teaching school, believe it or not intentionally, I just sort of fell into that. And a friend of mine lived up in New York City, who was a singer, and invited me up, and I went up there, and through a few things that happened, I decided, to maybe give it a go as a singer-songwriter. So I moved up to New York to try to be, like James Taylor II, and knocked around there, and eventually after about 5 years, got discovered by Judy Collins. And she recorded a few of my songs and got me my first staff writing job. And then a couple of years went by, and I hooked up with Tommy West, who did all Jim Croce stuff. And Tommy had started producing acts in Nashville. And so then he formed MTM Records. Remember MTM? In '85. And so I sort of came into Nashville sort of through the back door, kind of, through Tommy West. Although I actually, believe it or not, early in my career in New York, I got signed to Jerry Crutchfield to do a record in a duo I was in. And Jerry was real high on it, but the guy split and went to another group that had a deal. And he got nowhere, so. But so anyway, Tommy kind of got me into Nashville. So I came here in '85, you might say, as a staff writer for MTM. And eventually, got off the ground. It was really when to give you a few more details, this girl in New York got offered a record deal by Columbia Records, but they wanted to do a demo on her. And I'd written a few songs, and she liked them, so they brought in all these great studio musicians, and she said, "Let's do your songs." So they did my songs, and the producer got interested in me and signed me to a deal to get me a deal. And he was a reputable producer, and nothing really came of it. But that sort of validation was such that I went back to El Paso, and I thought, you know what, maybe I could do this. I grew up in El Paso loving music, I was playing guitar since I was 10 years old, but I'd never been around anybody who made a living, in music, much less, how to be a professional songwriter or an artist. That to me I had no idea how you did that. So I always say I had a couple of real big accidents in my life, and that was one of them. That out of the blue, this girl called me up to New York, and, and then I thought, well, went back to Texas, and I thought, let me give it a try. So I did. Yeah, as I said, I started playing when I was 10. When I was 18, I went through my first true love breakup, you know what I mean? And in my despair, I wrote a couple of songs that I don't even want to think about. They were so pitiful. But then I proceeded, I was in college and proceeded to go ahead and get a degree in English, and was very active in playing music and studied classical guitar, and eventually got in a band, but I didn't write any songs during that period so I went about between 18 and about 26 without writing any songs, didn't even think about it. But getting in this band, and that was the other big accident besides the girl in New York, was that I got in this band and I was really sort of dragged into it. I didn't want to get in this band, and they kept calling me up, and they were a working band playing covers, and they heard I was a good guitar player. They even never heard me, they just heard I was a good guitar player. So anyway, they forced me eventually into this band. And they said, let's do some original material. And that's when I really started to write. And up until then, I guess having that outlet or something. And I suddenly started writing songs. And pretty early on, I seemed to get a good reaction, from people about the songs. So, and I think from that time on, I was a writer. I always say, when they gave out the voices, they gave me a pretty, some people they gave Martin guitars, I got a Silvertone from Sears, So I never felt like I was a singer at all. But another thing about this band was they were big time into 3-part harmony. And they had 2 really good singers, and they just made me sing harmonies. And officially, first I was like, well, singing like that. But eventually they just made me sing. So when we started doing some original material, I started singing some of it. And little by little I got more and more comfortable with you know, but it was a long process for me to get used to singing. Yeah, they had some great writers there. Beth Chapman was there.
That's right.
And Radney and Bill, Holly Dunn was there, Judy Rodman. It was a really good, Tommy had collected a real good group of talent. And it was a label and a publishing company. And I was one of the acts supposedly on there.
And Marcus.
Yeah. And Tricia Yearwood was the receptionist there. But I had no idea she was a great singer at the time. And I actually did a record with Tommy, but right about the time they were going to release it, the company broke up. There was a big dispute amongst the three guys that ran it, and MTM just pulled the plug on it. But it was a good thing. It really was. Scott Borchetta was over there too. It was a good group. There was a really good vibe over there, and we were like a good little club. And I could not get anything cut for about the first 2 years. Couldn't get anything cut, and then all of a sudden Michael Johnson came along and cut The Moon Is Still Over His Shoulder, and that started to open the doors up. Even though I'd had a #1 record with Crystal Gayle prior to the MTM thing, believe it or not, Tommy, you know, when I was writing for Tommy, I wrote this song called "The Sound of Goodbye," and Judy Collins sent me. She says, "Go." You know, I told her I was going to go to Nashville, see what's going on down there. So this is before I really knew much about Nashville, and I went down to. She says, "Go see this guy that I think is going to produce my next album, named Jimmy Bowen." Well, I didn't know who Jimmy Bowen was. You know, God, I'm glad I didn't know, because I didn't know he was such a big cheese. So, I came down to Nashville and I had a meeting with him, and I was, very nervous about it. And I had a cassette with 3 songs, and I said. I didn't want to listen to him with him there, so I just said, we had a little chat. I said, "Here's this cassette, take it, and if you like it, great." Went home, and then did you ever hear this story about what happened with this song? So what happened was that Jimmy Bowen really liked of the 3 songs "Sound of Goodbye," but somewhere in making a copy of that and getting it to Crystal Gayle, my name fell off of it. And they had actually cut the song and picked it for the first single off the record, and they didn't know who wrote the song. And they were running all over Nashville trying to find out who wrote it. And finally somebody connected with Tommy West, an engineer, identified it as my song. So I got this call, you usually go through the hold to the cut, to maybe it's going to be the single. I went immediately from nothing to going to be the first single. That was the first thing I heard. And they cut a great record on it, so that's why I had a #1 record, bam. Oh yeah, later on it's like each week, will it lose its bullet? It's again. Oh God, it can be agony. Well, my first hit was a Judy Collins song called "Sound of Goodbye." Sound of Goodbye. Hard Times for Lovers. That was a song that kind of got me. That and the song I wrote called Dorothy were the songs that really got me signed to her. Actually, I got signed to, Marty Badendier and Charles Koppelman. They had the entertainment company. So that was my first staff writing gig. Oh yeah, I love that. I've been in an elevator when someone was singing one of my songs, you know what I mean, humming it. You always remember the first time you hear a song on the radio. The first time I heard "Sound of Goodbye," I was in a grocery store parking lot, and my girlfriend had gone in to get some groceries and had the radio on, and I heard the song. Blew my mind. What's funny is the biggest thing I remember thinking was that I just thought there were some warts on that song. You know what I mean? I thought, oh gosh, there's this problem here with a song and that problem there. And then when it was a hit, I thought, what was I thinking? It sounds great. And then I came up with this phrase, nothing sounds like a hit like a hit. Once it's hit, all the flaws sort of disappear. It's funny. For a long time, I did pretty much what I still do most of the time, which is to sit down and I may have a lyric idea or I may not, but then I begin to noodle on the guitar or the keyboard sometimes, mostly on the guitar, because I can play guitar. I'm a keyboard one, but I just noodle around until some kind of musical thing starts something in me, when I hear music that moves me, something in me wants to say something. You know what I mean? Like I can be in a department store while my wife's trying on dresses, and I'll hear some kind of music thing going on there that sort of is interesting, and something in me wants to speak. And so, you know, the normal way I write is to get a musical thing that makes me want to start writing lyrics, and then let that sort of lead me where I want to go. And then, so that's what I do most of the time. Starting about 4 years ago, through a sort of freak accident again, I got in a situation where, remember that album they did on Manic to Panic? Where they had, you know, remember, he's this kid that writes this poetry. He died a couple of years ago, but he was this kid who was about 12 years old, and he wrote this pretty interesting poetry, and he became very big. You'd go into airports and his books would be there. Somebody in Nashville had the idea of setting his poems to music. So they got a bunch of writers in town to do a record, which they did with Billy Gilmore singing it. Anyway, in the process of taking his poem and trying to get it into a, because he was not very structured at all, and in the process of trying to get that thing into a structured thing that turned into a song, it sort of opened up my eyes to how much more you could jerk lyrics around than I thought. Do you know what I'm saying? That you could be a little less structured than I had thought and still make it work sometimes.
With the phrasing, you mean?
Yeah, with the phrasing. Like, and so what happened is that about a year later, this very interesting thing happened to me that I heard on the radio, and I went down, and I was in Nashville, and I wrote this really free poem that was just, you know, completely unstructured, but it did have sections like verses. And I thought I'd just written a pretty interesting poem. And then a few days later, I started trying to, you know, go back and see if I can put structure to it. And I sort of got in about 2 or 3 days, I had rewritten this thing with rhyme and meter in it. And it really, I thought it was one of the most interesting songs I've ever written. And so from this, that has led me to occasionally do something like that. So sometimes, and I really like some of the songs I've written doing that. Sometimes I'll just really sit down and forget about the music, and just write this thing initially very free, and just let my, you know, lyric thing just go where it wants to go, and images go where they want to go, and then go back and try to, you know, shape it into a song. Yeah, for instance, try to rephrase the sentence so that it ends with a good rhyming word. You know what I mean? And then go back and initially, like I said, when I first did it, it seemed like it couldn't be done. But I found that by just kind of chewing on it, the English language really is pretty amazing and giving you a lot of ways to say something. And what I really, it's funny, if you write the melody first, you have a freedom in a way, because you don't have to worry about what the lyric does, and then you have to go back and struggle to get the lyric into it. And then now this is sort of the reverse thing. There's a certain freedom, and let's just let my lyric go all over the place where it wants to go. And I think it's some really interesting things, and then I have to go back, and try to get it into some kind of thing, a musical. Well, what I initially do is get it into a meter. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that I will actually underline the syllables where the beats are, because it can be kind of confusing, when you're shaping this thing. What was that rhythm I did? So I will underline. I started doing all my lyrics on the computer, and I will underline the beats. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Just things like that.
The emphasis.
So I'll end up with da 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 da, and then I go to the music and see where I go on the thing. There's nothing that has been cut of those. I've written probably about 6 or 8 of those songs. The one I was talking about was a song called "Wishing I Could Help." Have you got that song?
I'm not sure.
I think you should check that song out. It was called "Wishing I Could Help," and it's a pretty amazing song. It's uncommercial as hell. It's about 4.5 minutes long.
But you wrote it that way?
Yeah, that's the one that initially got me to do this. And Russ Titleman, just flipped over it. Russ, and he played it for Emmylou Harris a couple of years ago, and she flipped over it. But she hasn't cut it. So I was thinking, if you guys have that, let's go knock on her door again with that thing. Another song that I have on my new CD, which is not one of your songs, is a song called Another Way to Feel Alive. And I swear to God, I think it's going to be really major copyrights. And that's one of those kind of songs too, that I just initially wrote out completely lyrically. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes when I'm talking to young aspiring songwriters, I tell them to try that once in a while. Just write out the thing without worrying about the mechanics. In other words, write the lyric out without worrying about the mechanics of it. Because sometimes the mechanics can get you so tied up, you know what I mean, that you don't really express things the way you want to. So write it out without the mechanics and then go back. I'm sure I got a bunch of them here. One of the things I continually tell songwriters is that the sort of dynamic that I have in a song lyric is similar to me having a conversation with a guy in a bar. And by that I mean it's somebody I don't know. Like, in other words, my audience is a stranger to me. So I'm having this conversation with this guy in a bar. And so when I speak to this guy, I really want to get him interested in what I have to say. He doesn't have any interest in what I have to say. You know what I mean? He doesn't care about talking to me at all. So, I've got to get this guy interested in what I have to say. And I want to speak very directly to this guy. You know what I mean? And I really want to somehow tell the truth to this guy. To me, there's such, and again, when I say truth, I mean, I can take all kinds of liberties, but in some funny way, I like this thing to be rooted in something real. I always say, if some guy, I critique these songs, I'm sure you hear them too, where, like my song Ghost in This House, right? My verse, they'll say something like, with the same melody, they'll write some lyric that says, since you've been gone, I've been so blue, why did you break up with me? And it's just like boring as hell. So the way I start out Ghost in This House is I say, I don't pick up the mail, I don't pick up the phone. I get right down on kind of some unusual level and kind of intrigue the listener into the thing. And I got that verse from, and the other thing I preach so much is, and I really preach this a lot, is I want a writer to have something real in front of him when he writes a song, if he can. Well, what I mean is, like if I was a painter and I wanted to go paint a model, like some nude, let's say, I could sit in my studio and try to make up a nude, and if I was a good draftsman, it might look pretty real, but it would be like a mannequin. The reason really good artists get models is because those little tiny variations in the human being are what makes something real. And I feel the same way about the lyric in a song. If you can, like in Oklahoma Stray, that's something real that happened. You know what I mean? In other words, I'm not bound by the truth. You know what I mean? But on almost all the songs I write, there's something in there that's rooted in something I've witnessed. You follow what I mean? So I'm always urging songwriters, instead of just making up stuff out of your head, which you can do, and you can, if you have good imagination, and I do that too. But in general, when I have an idea for the song, almost the first thing I start doing is thinking about, okay, when have I been there? What memories can I pull up? What images can I pull up? I always say that if you'll tell me your real version of your heartbreak and really tell me some things that happened, I'll be interested in that. But if you just give me this general stuff, I'm not going to be interested in it. If you'll tell me really why you broke up, that gets interesting. And so, like my first big hit, "Sound of Goodbye," with Crystal Gayle, was again rooted in a real thing. I'd been in this relationship with this girl, and I remember talking one time, and I felt like, we're not saying it, but I think we're saying goodbye. Do you know what I mean? It was the sound of goodbye. So that gave me the idea for the title. And then the first verse of that, it says, "We kiss goodnight, and we turn out the light, and we lay side by side in the dark, and we're waiting for sleep or a spark. But the night's on the run, and the spark does not come, and we quietly worry and wonder, and the silence is louder than thunder, and it rings with the sound of goodbye." Well, that was a real moment I'd been in a relationship where we weren't making love anymore, you know what I mean? And we just weren't talking about it, and that silence was there. So anyway, I'm a big advocate that there's so much power if you get something real in front of the listener. There's a lot of truth in that story. It's actually a combination of two different cats I've had, one in Texas and one where I live now. But what happened was, the trigger on that song was the next door neighbor had these two kind of semi-feral cats that she fed. And my wife got real attached to the younger one. You know, my wife really liked the younger cat. And so we heard this neighbor was going to move and that she was going to try to take the young one with her. Well, it turned out she couldn't take, she couldn't get it in a box, you know what I mean? And so, anyway, I came home one day and there was a big bag of cat food on the side porch. And I thought, we've inherited the feeding of the cats. So we started feeding these two cats. But the older one, who we call Motley, was just, you could not ever touch her. And I never did, until she died. I never touched her. The young one we got to be friendly with, but Motley, and I remember, anyway, the trigger on that song was one day I saw her just creeping up to the food bowl and just so afraid, you know what I mean? And I really thought, she'd really been damaged, someone had really damaged her. And that was never going to change. And that tapped into a belief of mine that, some people really do get damaged in a permanent way, that some hearts truly break, So that's what led to me to sit down and try to write that song. So there's a lot of truth in that song. Mm-hmm. And then the part about where you find the cat dead, in Texas, a cat we found on the side of the road, luckily she wasn't too messed up and she was dead. We buried her. So I just kind of combined those two stories. And I think it's pretty powerful. So it's funny, I played that one time, my wife, I was playing at a pretty nice theater, on Long Island, and I played that song and my wife was in the audience and she said, when you got to that part about you finding the cat dead, this woman behind me went, So I had this idea one time, I should get about 20 of my friends at the Bluebird in on a deal, right? And when I get to that line, everybody in the room go, See, that's one of those things about getting those images in there, getting those fresh images if you can. I always think you got to get fresh images. I always tell songwriters, the thing you're trying to do is, and it's never going to change, is you got to say the same thing that's been said many times, and many times really well said. And the only way you're going to be able to get that interesting is to find fresh ways of doing it. Fresh images. So your challenge is to go out and try to find fresh ways to say the same thing. That was an extremely important song in my career, believe it or not, because I had this #1 record. Well, first I had my Judy Collins, it was a top 10 easy listening song, so that was my first hit technically, but my first real hit was Sound Like a Vine. That was a #1 record. And you think everybody's going to knock your door down after that. Well, didn't happen. You know what I mean? You don't realize how many people have had #1 records in this town. And then I had the second #1 hit with Michael Johnson on The Moon Is Still Over His Shoulder. And still, nobody was beating a path to my door. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't like I couldn't get in to see some people, but when that came out, man, all of a sudden, all the producers started calling me, because that was a really unusual kind of song. It was really different. And it started out with this kind of 6/8 feel. It was kind of a strange feel. And I didn't even realize it was in 6/8 till I actually went to do the demo, and then what is this, and I realized this isn't in 4 or 2, it's in 6/8. So, but anyway, I had the idea, a couple I knew was breaking up, and they were, it wasn't going to get back together. So I thought about, what about a song called That's Sad? I mean, it's over. And then, I don't know how much you want to hear about this, but I can go on and on. So, in my life, I had this thing happen where I'd written this song called This Country's Bigger Than Texas. And I went down to Nashville and I played it for Kyle Lenning, who was doing Randy. And I played it for Brent, who was doing the Judds. And they both liked it, didn't say anything, didn't put it on hold or anything. So then I got back to New York, and about a week later, Brent calls me up and says, "Man, I like that song. I'm gonna cut it. I want to put it on hold. I'm gonna cut it. I don't know who. I may cut it on Michael. I might cut it on the Judds, but I'm gonna cut it. I want to put it on hold." I swear to God, in about an hour, the phone rang and it was Kyle, and he said, "We want to cut that song tomorrow on Randy Travis." And don't do this to me. You know what I mean? I don't believe this. So I called up, I said, well, I told him what happened I said, look, Brent just put it on hold, So I said, let me call Brent, see what I can do. So I called Brent back up and he said, he says, well, man, he says, I'm just going to have to stick to my guns. I really think it's a good song, and I'm just going to have to, you have to honor that hold for me. But he said, let me call Kyle. I'll do it for you. Great. So he calls me back, the next day, and he says, guess what? We're going to do a duet with the Judds and Randy Travis. This is when they were like major hot, what I mean? And I was like, man, where's the Porsche dealership? This is unbelievable. And so we went through about 2 months of them rehearsing it, and getting the deals, between the two labels to agree to sing. And then all of a sudden, I get this call. Randy just backed out of the whole thing. He says he doesn't want to do a duet with the Judds. And to make a long story short, nobody cut the song. So I went through this period of being really pissed off for about 3 months. Do you know what I mean? I was just really, really angry. And then, I let it go, and that sadness, and that's when that it wasn't going to happen. So that's where that really came from emotionally, was that sad, it's not going to happen. And then I thought, well, let me just put it in a relationship context, And the opening verse of that song, there's a quarter moon that's laying up on the ridge, and he's making up his mind to rise or to set. That's another real image. My wife and I were out camping near where we live on Long Island Sound, and there's this big ridge, and this moon just went right down the ridge. Didn't rise, didn't set. And I didn't think about it at the time, but that image popped into my mind when I was writing this song. The other funny story about that song I like to tell is that I came down to New York, from New York to Nashville. I really thought I had a good song, and by then I could see who I wanted to see, So the first person I saw was Jim Ed Norman. And as I say, the song had this kind of unusual 6/8 feel. And so Jim Ed listened to the song and he said, that's a great song, but you got to change that feel. And I thought, well, I don't know about that, because I sure like it. And then I went over to play it for Brent, and he jumped out of his chair and he said, that is the coolest feel I've ever heard. So, that just shows you how crazy this business is. And then he cut this great record. That record on That Sad is just about my favorite record. Yeah, that's how that was the genesis of the whole thing.
Was that? It wasn't
that. Yeah, I actually, right before I came down to Nashville one time, prior to that, I sat down in my little recorder, and I just came up with that little riff, dun 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 dun. That's kind of interesting. I put it down, and then I came back from the trip, like a week or two later, and I thought, well, I've got to write a new song, and I almost didn't listen to it. It's a piece of crap. But then at some point I listened to it, dun 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 dun. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. So then I went back and. The whole thing started with that riff. What's funny is I almost, people, some of my songwriting friends say that, they're driving the car and the melody comes in their head. I almost never do that. Melodies don't get to me going until I get a chord progression. It's only after I get a chord progression going that I begin to see what I could do with a melody. And a cappella melodies just don't turn me on in a funny way. I've got to have some kind of chord thing that got some kind of, before I begin to play with them, how the melody's going to move. Oh, by the way, I ripped off Robert Frost in the bridge of That's That. Yeah, there's a little whisper. He says, when did the heart of, I don't quote this quite right, but when did the heart of man, was it ever less than treason to go with the drift of things and yield with grace and reason to the end of a love or a season? I always loved that little section of this poem. And so at some point when I was writing that thing, I remembered about the end of a love or a season. Don't you hate to see a season end? Yeah. So, and then on Song River Swim, I kind of ripped off Anne Sexton. Now she's a pretty famous poet from the 1950s, who wrote some pretty cool poems. And one of the poems she wrote was called "The Music Swims Back to Me." By the way, this is another thing I always tell young songwriters, is read some poetry. I swear to God, read some poetry. It'll give you a lot of ideas, even though you don't think at the time, But anyway, she wrote this poem called "The Music Swims Back to Me." And it seems like it's this older woman in some kind of institution, like, whether she's in a mental asylum or old age home, I wasn't sure, but the radio's playing, and there's this line in the poem where she says, "That song remembers more than I do." You know, and I thought, wow, that's an interesting idea, that the song does remember it. You know what I mean? So I wrote down this idea, the song remembers. I just wrote that down in my idea, the song remembers. And then a few months later, my wife and I were out in Colorado in the Rocky Mountains. You know, the second verse, we were rolling through the Rockies, you know, and I heard for the first time my Randy Travis Hard Rock Bottom of Your Heart on the radio. And I thought, oh God, what a great moment. I'm in Rocky Mountain National Park, and the spectacular scenery, and for the first time I hear on the radio, you know, Hard Rock Bottom of Your Heart, and I thought, you know, I'm going to always remember that moment. And then I thought, God, well, I got this idea I just thought of, you know, about the song Remember. So when I got back to New York, I started, you know, just writing that song. And I thought, you know, I just started thinking, okay, when else have I heard when have I heard a song that's taking me back? And I just, I was standing at the counter, and, you know, that happened. And I just, you know, the hardest verse was the last verse, which was, you know, what kind of conclusion do I, you know, how do I take, that's in a way the hardest thing to try to explain to another writer, or, you know, to teach, is, you know, how do you come to a conclusion in a song? But I feel like sometimes it's really important in some songs. You know, like to me, good movies, good stories, and good songs that are story songs, you know, have that punchline kind of thing at the end. And sometimes, you know, you start going down the road, you don't really know what the punchline is at all, but you have the sense that it is there. You know, that's another thing I like to, I always start trying to look, you know, Harlan Howard said to me one time, I think it was about Hard Rock Bottom, he said, you know, that's a good song, Hugh. He said, that song tells you where it's going and it goes there. And I always said that was that's what a good song ought to do. And so I start trying to look for the finish line pretty early in the beginning of the lyric. Do you know what I mean? Even though I may not be sure where it's going, I keep thinking, okay, I'm looking, you know, I gotta find that. The same thing in Oklahoma Straight, you know. What kind of overarching statement can I make? If I can. Sometimes I can't find it till, but in general, I feel like the quicker I can identify the target, you might say, the more focused my lyric is going to be to getting you there. You know. That's why I think sometimes intriguing the listener is better than telling them. In other words, just, you know, you're not sure where this is going, but you do it in an interesting way, and they start taking the trip with you. And, you know, as you know, they can drop out on you at any time, boy. So, you know, when I think I have a song done, I listen to it over and over again. I really do. I bet I listen to the thing like 200 times at least. You know, and I'm continually trying to feel like, where do I drop out of this thing? You know, why is it every time the second verse comes out, I suddenly am thinking about something else? Well, there's something not there, you know, or why is it, you know, I'm just waiting for this thing to get over this part, you know, and that's what I call fat in a song. I'm trying to get that fat out of there. I want to make, you know, every now and then I get a compliment from a writer that says my songs are very economical, you know, and I really like that compliment because that's what I try to do. I always feel like the listener is just, you know, like I always say, like, picking up a ball bearing with a weak magnet, you know what I mean? You gotta, you know, you could lose them any time if you jerk it or something, so you gotta do it smooth, you know. It won an Emmy, believe it or not.
Wow.
For they have a category in the Emmys called Outstanding Achievement in Music and Lyrics, and Trisha Yearwood had done a Disney special, and it got nominated for. You know, Outstanding Achievement in Music and Lyrics, and you know what? I really think I didn't get nominated for Grammy. I think I really, not to sound too ridiculous, but I think I might have won a Grammy. But you know, the timing is sometimes. The timing couldn't have been worse for that song. But you know, by the time the nominations came around, it you know, it had really gone by. It was a struggle getting that song cut. You know, when I wrote that song, I really felt like that song was as good a song as I'll ever write. And I don't, you know, on all my songs, I may feel that way for 10 minutes, you know what I mean? But after I played it for a few other people, you know, that are kind of my sounding boards, and everybody's flipping over, I thought, this is something. And I really began to believe that this was as good a song as I was ever going to write. And I felt like, in a way, that if I couldn't get this song cut, it was going to represent a repudiation of what I most wanted to do as a songwriter. You know, if I can't get this song cut, then I might as well give up. And so anyway, you know, we started pitching it around, and I had two big producers call me up and ask me if I'd rewrite it to make it more radio friendly. You know, and I just didn't see it. You know, no. That's why I'm now. As I'm talking about, let me shut that up. So then, you know, it knocked around. I swear for like a year or two. Pitched it to Trisha, and she passed on it the first time around. Then, what really killed me was Kathy Mattea cut it. You know, Brent cut it on Kathy Mattea, and let me turn this thing off. Hold on. So, and then it got left off the album. You know, and I never heard the cut, but I remember thinking, if there are 10 better songs on that album than this thing, I'll eat that record, you know. And but it was very devastating to me. You know, I was really, really depressed about it. And then by the time that Trisha cut it, I was totally paranoid. You know what I mean? I thought anything can go wrong with this song's going to go wrong with it. And but lo and behold, you know, she did this amazing record. I remember one of the most memorable moments of my entire songwriting career was sitting in Garth Funtes' office and hearing that cut, man. And the first thing I said was to Garth, "We're in the Hall of Fame." And I just thought it was that amazing when I heard that song. What a great record. Probably the song River Swim, but I think Asking Us to Dance, you know, a lot of people love that. A lot of people got married to that or get married to it. And I think Ghost in This House is one of those songs that people keep coming back to. You know, Alison Krauss, Marty Raymond just killed it, and then Alison Krauss really killed it in a different kind of way. I almost quit singing it when I heard her version of it. It really blew me away. She wouldn't, you know, it's funny, she maybe I told you this, but she started doing it, you know, in her concerts for about 3 years before she recorded it. And it was like driving me nuts, you know. I had seen her perform it live a couple times. I even had her on singing out with the Boston Pops, you know, on PBS. And I kept saying, "Put it on a record!" You know, finally one day I ran into her, Denise, you know, her manager. She said, "It's going to be good news for you. Alison's going to put it on a record." Hallelujah. You know what, I always tell people it's the music business, it's not the lyric business. And I think the key thing in a song is the music. I really do. You know, as much as I'm focused on lyric, you know, I always say you can take a great melody and sing it in a foreign language and really turn people on, but you can take a great lyric and put it to bad music and it just will not fly, no way. So the music is really critical, I think. And then if you can, you know, if you can couple that with a powerful lyric, then you've got something amazing. You know, most of the time I don't listen to it. I always say it's like in the old days when they said when you throw a pass, there's three things can happen and two of them are bad. You know, and I feel the same when I listen to radio. You know, there's 3 things can happen and 2 of them are bad. Well, one of them is I'm hearing all these songs I hate. You know, I think how they get cut, and the other bad thing is I hear songs that are unbelievable and I want to kill myself. You know what I mean? Because how they write that thing. And then, you know, the good thing is when I hear one of mine on the radio. But I always say you got to keep in touch with what's going on. So I sort of do it in streaks. You know, they have these cable channels now that just do, like up in where I am, it's like channel 800 or something. It just plays solid, you know, songs, and they just have kind of graphics up there. And I'll just take, you know, 2 or 3 hours of it once in a while, and just kind of scoot along through it and see what strikes me. And you know, I've heard that one before enough, you know, and that's a good way to kind of catch up. There's also a website all about country. Have you seen that thing? And they have little excerpts from whatever's on the charts. And most of the time, what I'm listening for is, you know, what kind of fields are going on. You know, what kind of attitudes are going on. You know, we're definitely in a different kind of attitude than we used to be in a lot of ways. Not to sound like an old fuddy-duddy, but I feel like when I was up in New York and I was, in the 80s, and I was just starting to really be a staff writer down here, and most of the New Yorkers weren't listening to country music. They used to ask me, what do you like about country music? And I used to say, well, what I really like about it is you can really talk about adult things. You can talk about divorce and drinking and marriage problems and all that kind of thing. And I feel like that's not so much the case now. Do you know what I mean? It's gotten so youth-oriented that a lot of my writer friends will write songs and they say, well, it's a great song, but who's going to cut it? You got to have some mileage on you to do this thing. So I miss that. I also feel like there's less truth in a way, in terms of just, like for instance, I feel like very few female singers want to be vulnerable in a song, and that's a crying shame to me, because that's not true, that's not real, that's not human nature. You don't have to be a role model on every song you sing. And I feel a lot of the guys, in a funny way, as females get more assertive, the guys are being pushed to be more macho. Do you know what I'm saying? So their thing is getting to be more macho, and they don't want to be so vulnerable either. And I kind of want to. I want to get back to honesty, man, of human nature. Let's tell the truth about human nature. I feel like there's real power there, and people are going to respond to that. You don't have to continually think about what your fans are going to think of your image, in this particular song. Take some chances. That's the last thing I'll say about. I wish there were a few more acts that really took a few chances. You got how many songs on a record? Take a few chances on them. You don't have to take a safe one on every single one. Take some chances. That to me is how music grows and gets better. Is by somebody sticking their neck out once in a while. Mm-hmm. Some acts do, thank God. I feel it's a bit unfortunate to me that so many artists want to be writers, as well. I have this fantasy where, because you see a lot of my writer friends, the main way they get cussed these days is writing with artists, and a lot of times there are some good writers who are artists, but most of them to me are not on the level that the pro writers are here in this town. And so they get together with an artist and they write this song with the artist and they get a cut, and I certainly don't have any problem with that. But one of the things I'd love to do is not that this will ever happen, but I'd love to be the writer and say to the artist, since we're going to co-write this thing, I'd like to get up on stage with you and co-sing it with you. You know what I mean? Let me get in on your end of the thing. I'd like to get some more fame here. So can I get up there like on the second verse and do that? Well, God, I'd love to get a Taylor Swift cut, yeah. But she's the real thing. It sounds like one, but she's great. Mm-hmm. She absolutely knocked me down. It kills me when someone who's that entertaining can also write that great. That's exactly right. One time on the other extreme, I remember coming down here to Nashville back in the 80s, and I played some guy, I think it was The Moon Is Still Over Her Shoulder, which is about an older couple. And this guy, he was a big time, producer, I can't remember who it was, said, oh, we're not doing songs about old people anymore. You know what I mean? We want songs about young people. And the mistake they're making is that if the song is written right, anybody who's a human being relates to it. Do you know what I mean? There's certain human constants that you relate to, and I've seen kids who were 15 years old that just love Songbird Swing. You know what I mean? And things like that. If you write the song right and rooted in real human truths, I really think kids can hear it, and I think adults can hear it in a kid's song. It's all about giving that, whether it's true or not, giving it that sense of something really true coming at you. And another thing I always tell songwriters is that as clever as you might want to be in a song, the most powerful thing there is in a lyric is to sound really honest and direct. You know what I mean? When you really speak, I'm always asking myself, what would I really say in this situation? If I was in this situation, what would I really say? I always tell songwriters who are trying to learn how to do it, I say, read your lyric back and see, and ask yourself, would you really say this on each line? Is this really how you talk? And a lot of times, man, no way would they say this stuff. And so I'm always coming back, and I never think, what would I really say? And then I may try to, do some clever thing with it, but it's got to be rooted and close to me, what I'd really say. That, like that Taylor Swift thing just sounds totally believable.
Yeah.
And it's a very imaginative kind of thing. I'm still really into it. And that's all. In a funny way. My songs have always been off-center. You might say. I've always had to me, getting cuts has always been hard in a way because I rarely write down the middle. But the reason I love songwriting is because I'm just going to do it the way that's going to get me off the most. So my number one goal is always just to get me off of it, and then try to bear in mind, the marketplace and the other people I'm talking to. But I feel like as long as I'm really moving myself, then I'm a songwriter. You know what I mean? No matter what happens, that's what I want to do. I feel like if you have the real calling, that's what you do. You don't just quit, doing it when nothing's happening. I said to someone not too long ago in an interview, actually I did for Music Row. I said, when you really get down, about things, nothing that makes me get up again than writing a song that I think is really a great song. It's a frustrating business. I really think someone said to me one time, well, you must have to have a really thick skin, and I said, you know what? I have the thinnest skin you ever saw. I get killed by rejection, but what I do have is resiliency. Something about me gets up in about a day or two and says, "Oh, I'll show them." You know what I mean? And I just come back.
Yeah.
I think you got to be resilient. That's what you got to be.
Yeah.
Skip and I wrote that. That's one of my few co-writes. And I was talking to a guy who'd been to. There's a famous novelist named E.L. Doctorow. He wrote Ragtime, and several things have been made into movies. And a friend of mine was telling me he went to a lecture he gave, and someone asked him, when you write a novel, it just seems like such a huge undertaking. How do you do it? And he said, writing a novel is kind of like driving at night. You can't see that far in front of you, but you just keep going. And so that was what led to that lyric idea of that. These headlights. I can't see for how we're going, but I know the road keeps going on and on. So I kind of wrote this verse out, and then got together with Skip, and the guy comes up with a melody in about 10 seconds, and he had this melody going, which I thought was pretty cool. And it's funny though, we never quite, I'm a terrible co-writer, and we never quite, he had sort of his way of doing it, and I had sort of my way of doing it. We never really got it, that's one of those songs you keep thinking I'm going to go back to and get my version of it just the way I want, and then I'll give him credit, I'll leave his name on there. Well, I like to write by myself. I almost never co-write, and it's not because I have anything against co-writing. It's absolutely, my favorite Roger Miller line is, the human mind that does amazing things. It starts working the day you're born, and it doesn't stop until you sit down and try to write a song. And isn't that a great line? But that's how I am in co-writing. I'm telling you, the minute I get in a room with someone, my mind just shuts. I go dumb. It's like I was one of these kids in school. Up in front of the class, you know what I mean? I just couldn't think. You know what I mean? If I had to get up and do something in front of the class, I got so anxiety ridden that I couldn't. So, some part of me just will not relax. I think if I ever successfully co-write, it'll be with which I could do somebody's lyric and my melody, or vice versa. But when I first started, when I first came down here as a sort of official MTM writer, I'd already known Jim Norman, and he called up a bunch of co-writers. There were big-time writers, in town, and said, "Will you write with this guy?" And they all had to say yes. And so we got together, and I asked them all, "What is it you really like about co-writing?" And they all said something I did expect, which was, you know, it helps you solve problems. But the thing I didn't expect, which most of them said, was it gave them structure in their daily life. They had to get up, they had to get cleaned up, they had to meet somebody at 10 o'clock, you know, and they said, if I don't do that, I just sit around and screw around the day. So it got them in gear, kind of. And then, and I know they love the social end of it, you know what I mean? Some of these guys really have a good time co-writing songs, and I envy that, I really do. I wish I could do it. And the other thing, one of the things I don't like about co-writing, what little I tried of it, is a lot of times my ideas are pretty subtle, do you know what I mean? They're not that obvious, it's hard to explain in real quick. So, you know, I come in with an idea that I thought was pretty cool, but, you know, I couldn't get them to bite on the thing because they couldn't, they couldn't see where I could see where this was going to go. So that I had to come up with some more obvious, some obvious kind of title kind of thing. Did you ever hear my story about a Neil Diamond co-write? If you want to hear another story, it's one of my favorite stories. You know, when Neil Diamond came to town, remember this? And did this album where he co-wrote with a bunch of people. Well, I was one of the ones that got called up, and this woman called up and said, would you like to write with Neil Diamond? Well, hell yes. You know what I mean? Even though I don't like to co-write, I can't pass that up. I love Neil Diamond. We used to play a lot of his songs in my band, in El Paso. And so anyway, I flew down, and I came down, and I was supposed to get together with Neil Diamond that afternoon just to chit-chat. So I went down to Brentwood, where he had rented his house, and then had a nice meeting with him. He's a really nice guy, and by then several of my friends had already written with him, and they were all talking about what a great guy he is, and he gave him a guitar, and stuff like that. So anyway, everybody really liked him, and so anyway, I started a song because I didn't want to go in there with none. So I got this song going, which I thought was a pretty cool song, but it was sort of just the third there, and anyway, after I got home that night from the first meeting with Neil Diamond, I just started getting more and more nervous, about it. And I had talked to Mike Reed, and he said that he'd been asked, but he passed on. And so, finally, in the middle of the night, I thought, I'm a nervous wreck here. I'm having this. I'm imagining sitting in the room with Neil Diamond like a moron, for like all day long. It would be like my worst nightmare. And so I got up in the morning, and I called, I was supposed to be there at 10, and I called at 9 o'clock over to his house, and his assistant answered, and I said that my mother had been in a car accident. And I wasn't going to be able to make it because my mother had been in a car accident. And they were very sorry to hear that, and the song I had started, I went ahead and finished it. It was on The Verge, which, was a big hit, so that's one plus, anyway, that came out of the thing. Although I really would have loved to have done it, but I just got too nervous. And then the footnote of this whole funny thing is I told Mike Reed this story, And then about 2 months later, I'm sitting at home one day, and my phone rings, and I answered the phone, and this voice said, "Is this Hugh Prestwood?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "This is Neil Diamond's office, and we were just wondering how your mother was doing." And I about had a heart attack, because first of all, I couldn't remember what I told him. And then and then all of a sudden, as I was stammering, I heard this laughing, and it was Mike Reed. You wouldn't believe the reaction I got on that when I came to Nashville after that was on the radio. I had writers just rushing up to me. "What were you thinking when you did that? Why did you do that?" Some of them were giving me these strange, convoluted explanations as to what I must have been thinking, and I just said, "No, it's just like a goof." I was trying to rhyme with "around me," and at some point I thought "slow down me," and this is another thing I tell writers. I said, anytime I come up with an idea and my brain says you shouldn't do that, but my gut feeling says, yeah, but I really like it, then I do it. And that was one of those things, and invariably those kind of things are what really stand out in the song, and make them special, is taking those little chances like that. I had a kid, a couple of years later, I addressed a third grade class, up where I lived. This teacher I knew said, "Come play some songs for my class." I played several songs. One was on The Verge, and I got through, and this little kid raised his hand. He said, and I said, "Yes." And he said, "Mister, you said something wrong in that song. Nothing will slow down me. Get that kid out of here. That's a good thing to remember once in a while too. Sometimes you do something you ain't supposed to do, but you can just take some license with it. It all comes down to you think it works or not. I tell her, I say, I don't think I'm wrong. I wouldn't be all surprised if I was an unknown writer and I came into some of the people in this town. They would say I couldn't do that. They'd say, no, you can't. That's not how you talk. And in country, you have to talk, normal. But and I agree with that in general. But every now and then, that's the same thing happened in Ghost in This House. Although it's a subtle thing. But in the chorus, I'm just a whisper of smoke. Now, I had wisp of smoke. I'm just a wisp of smoke. You know what I mean? And that was fine with me. But I was thinking about, this house being really silent and everything. At some point, I thought, what about whisper of smoke? And I thought, well, that's not what anybody says, but that's kind of cool. And many writers come up to me and say they love that line, whisper of smoke. That was just one of those little things you do that poetic license. Sometimes I think the very things that make a song really exceptional are the same things that make it hard to get cut sometimes. Because you're doing something different. And it takes somebody, I always feel like there's just a handful of people around at any given point in time that can hear past what is obvious. You know what I mean? A lot of A&R people can't, I don't think. What I used to say is, if you go to your boss and sell him on this song, it's taking chances. Well, if it flops, then you may be in hot water. But if you take him a real obvious thing and it flops, what do we know? It was like everything else. It was a hit. So you haven't really put your career in danger. I read one time an article about why movies were so bad, and that was basically what they were saying is that once these guys get into this raking in the money position, they don't like to. They don't like to stick their necks out. They just want to hang in there for 3 or 4 more years and they can retire, and stand behind something. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like the kind of producers or the kind of record execs who will just stop believing this act. God damn, I don't care what they say. You know what I mean? If I have to release 5 albums on this guy, those people are pretty rare. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and getting rarer. It's funny. After a song Remember When was a hit. They told me over at BMG that they actually had 3 or 4 producers call over there complaining that they hadn't been pitched that song, and they had been. Mm-hmm. They didn't even remember it. Yeah. I sort of got it. I think I always say you got to establish a church. You know what I mean? It's like you got to have believers. Mm-hmm. And you gotta go in there, and I feel like as a plugger, you got to go in there and with this kind of belief that is going to undermine their opinion. You know what I mean? I saw a guy one time talking about negotiations, and he said the key thing is to undermine the guy's, get him to question his own position. And I think, a plugger that goes in there just with the belief, you know what I mean, can at least occasionally pull that off on somebody who doesn't quite hear it. You need to come back to him 3 times. Listen to it again, damn it.